On today's World Insight, longtime German Chancellor Angela Merkel will not be on the ballot in Germany's national election. What legacy does she leave behind? And booming trade between China and its ASEAN neighbors. Is there more room to grow? What are the prospects despite global headwinds such as the pandemic? Answers from a China-ASEAN trade promo executive.
We have no doubt that most possibly the agreement will be ratified by all member states.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. After almost 16 years at the helm of Europe's largest economy, Angela Merkel will step down as Germany's chancellor once a new government is formed after federal elections on September 26th. As one of the world's most influential leaders, Angela Merkel will leave her indelible mark on Germany, Europe, and also global affairs. Just a few days till the election, Germany's Social Democratic Party is the front-runner, while the center-left SPD's popularity has risen since August. So who will likely succeed Ms. Merkel? And which parties will take the reins of government? Let's loop in our panelists, and they have quite some very different views. For the German election and Merkel's legacy in Berlin, we're joined by Ulrich Bruckner, Jean Monnet Professor for European Studies at Stanford University in Berlin. In Chapel Hill, United States, Klaus Laris, originally from Germany. He's a distinguished professor of history and international affairs from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Last in Beijing, not least, Mr. Mao Mingqiao, assistant professor, fellow at the Center for German Studies with Peking University. Gentlemen, what a pleasure to see all of you. Let me start by asking you about the significance of this election. I'm sure the two German who are with us today knows it really to the core of it. So Professor Laris, you want to go first?
Yeah, it's of course significant. If any chancellor leaves office after 16 years, the new era will begin. And the wonderful thing is that Angela Merkel decided to leave herself. She wasn't booted out by the electorate. She didn't lose an election, but she decided that after 16 years in power, it's enough. She wants to retire, and apparently she doesn't want to have another political job, be it in Germany or internationally. So this clearly will begin a new era.
Mr. Bruckner, though, her leaving the post at this critical juncture made a lot of people worry. Of course, any politician would have the time to be in the position and also at the time to leave the chair. But what do you make of the reality?
Well, it is a crucial moment for Germany. Whether it's a new era remains to be seen, because it can also be that we start a new situation in which we don't know how long the next chancellor will be in office or how long it's going to take to form a new coalition. Faces like a Helmut Kohl government of 15 years and Merkel with 16 years are so unusual in Western-type democratic systems that I'm quite skeptical whether we see something like a new era happening after that.
Why?
Because we have a more diversified society, and societies that become more and more diverse and not homogeneous react on the different programs that are offered in a parliamentarian democracy. Parties try to mobilize different classes, different groups of people, different levels of education, but there is no such thing like either you are working class and you go for the Social Democrats, or you're conservative and then it's kind of a family thing for generations to vote for the same party. This is no longer happening. You can be a conservative and vote for the environment as a green supporter. It's no longer the exact opposite of what the CDU stands for. And therefore, you have so many more choices and also more parties that could form a coalition.
This is a new era, isn't it? We can say that Merkel is basically an outgoing era, that another chancellor who lasted for 16 years is unlikely, that we have a totally new scenario with many more parties involved, many more new issues involved, which all have to be considered, so that the era of stability and reliability under Merkel may be also a little bit of a more boring era, which was dominated by just one chancellor, but that is coming to an end. So that is a new era. It might be a more uncertain era, a more unstable era, but I do think that something really new is going to begin.
The newer thing will be the
my
better thing?
understanding of an era is rather that you have the same person in charge. If the era is the opposite of sort of continuity, then I totally agree.
Well, we see all the two Germans are exactly like the Germans. They are debating about the election already. I remember very clearly covering the last election in Germany, in Berlin, in fact, and going into any coffee shop, everybody is talking about the election. Certainly the awareness about the election and the political rights are extremely high. But what does that mean? You know, this change, whether you call it an era or a change of the individual. Mr. Mao, from your perspective, what is your observation?
Well, I don't think there's any change at all. I mean, maybe that of course, we'll have a new chancellor from September. Merkel will step up willingly from her office. But if you look at the election campaign, you can see the whole theme is about who is going to carry on Merkel's legacy and who is going to go on with the set course of Angela Merkel. You start with Armin Laschet, who's acting now like Merkel's best baby kid. And on the other hand, you have Olaf Scholz, who's posting in Merkel's gesture, telling the voters that I am the one that is capable of doing what Merkel has done in the last 16 years. So I would say that at least on social themes, on social topics, and what the German internal affairs is concerned, we will see a great continuity, even in the next administration.
You know, one of the things that we need to really talk about is the role of Germany on the European continent, for example, within the EU. Now we see France, as a result of the latest U.S. decision to sell nuclear subs to some of the U.S. allies, have been making quite clear statements about the future. Now, Germany's role will becoming even more important in this case as to where Europe is going.
You mentioned about the France and the submarine deal France once had with Australia, and now the France is calling out the strategic autonomy within the European Union. I think that is exactly Merkel stands for, the strategic autonomy. On the one hand, she enhances the transatlantic partnership with the United States, but on the other hand, she struck a deal with Russia despite of ideological differences, and this Nord Stream 2 project does not only ensure Germany's energy autonomy, but also its strategic autonomy in the international politics. So that is the reason why Chancellor Merkel is so successful, both internally and internationally.
Professor Bruckner, about the future of Europe, particularly with all the latest geopolitical change. I know Germany has been struggling to make that role with the leadership of Angela Merkel. Now, with a less experienced international player, will Germany still be where it is, or it's likely to change?
With regard to what has been said before about the perception of Germany, if you look back how the performance of Germany was before Merkel came into office, a lot has been improved in terms of the reputation or the nation branding of the country. That it is more likable, people have a very positive opinion about Germany and its achievements, and also her style as a leader, which does not necessarily mean that Merkel is eager to lead. And that makes it difficult in times in which, different from the 1990s, when a lot of countries were afraid of a unified Germany could act unilaterally and more in its self-interest. Now the fear is much greater that Germany could not have enough appetite for leadership or to invest in what Professor Mao called a strategic autonomy or a stronger European integration. That has to do with a competition of different narratives about what this leadership implies or what strategic autonomy requires. And France has a very clear idea what that means, but France isn't strong enough to push it through and to modernize the European Union according to French priorities. And this is another weakness, I would say, from the Merkel years, that she did not sufficiently support Macron. And therefore, I disagree with Professor Mao about the state of strategic autonomy of the European Union, which is far from ideal.
Mr. Mao, respond, please.
Well, I think that Merkel is leading by example. She sets an example of how Germany could balance between a value-based and interest-based foreign policies. So I think if she or her successor could transmit this to the European Union on a greater level, on a higher level, this could be a good example of how European Union is going to position itself between, let's say, the geopolitical power balance.
This is an absolutely fascinating discussion. Professor Laris, I also want you to comment on this point.
Yeah, there have been two recent crises in relations with the United States. As you know, the abrupt withdrawal from Afghanistan and now recently the submarine deal with Australia. In both cases, the European Union, or in the latter case, France, was not consulted at all. That has led to a lot of annoyance and anger on the European continent, in the whole EU, and even a lot of concern in Germany. So that explains the calls for an increased strategic autonomy, a European army, more European military efforts, and so on. But we should not overlook that this is an elite obsession. This is not necessarily reflected by the will and interest of the German people. So the population is not really in support of spending a lot more money on the military, having something like strategic autonomy. And so Merkel and Macron largely agree, though Macron pushes that much harder than Merkel has ever done. Right. Whether that can be realized in the future must be seen. That really depends on whether the new chancellor can persuade his people, public opinion, that strategic autonomy, a European military effort and a European army is really worthwhile doing. And this is still very much an open question.
Let me move on to another question about Germany's relations with China. A lot of the Chinese that I've been talking to are having quite good impressions, in fact, about Angela Merkel, not necessarily about her fashion style, but very much about her policy style. For example, about the pandemic, which this part of the world are very concerned and have been practicing zero tolerance, so to speak, policy. And they saw a strong leadership inside Germany about vaccination, about fight against the pandemic, about multilateralism in this fight. So that, to the outsiders of your country, is extremely impressive. But will that change? And that certainly is a domestic issue. That's a hotspot issue for every country right now. Professor Laris, briefly from you, before I move on to your German counterpart who usually do not agree with you. So go ahead, sir. You have the first point.
I think that in all likelihood that is going to continue. German efficiency in inverted commas or skills of organization, I think that runs throughout the political elite, and Laschet and Scholz will also try to represent that. As far as German-Chinese relations are concerned, there's been a policy of engagement under Angela Merkel, both in the economic sphere, of course. China is a very important export market for Germany, but also politically, because Merkel, and I think the whole German political elite believes that you engage with another power in order to arrive at compromises, maybe to persuade the other power to change its political behavior to some extent, the way you want it and you see it. So that as that kind of style of engagement, both politically and economically, I can see that that will continue.
Yeah, Professor Buchner.
I agree.
You agree? Oh, wow.
I agree. Yeah,
all right.
I agree.
Go ahead.
We are a country that is based on the rule of law, and people trust in norms and standards, and we wait at traffic lights in the night, no matter if a car is coming or not.
Wow.
So this is a very German thing, and it doesn't matter who is currently in power, because the mechanism of policy making continues to exist. This is both true for Germany as well as for policy making in the European Union. If we trust in institutions, things will continue. So there is sort of a stabilizing factor that also supports what Professor Mao said in the beginning, that there is a certain dimension of continuity. But when we think of China, Germany is currently pushed by the United States to take sides. And I don't think that this happy leading by example attitude and preaching multilateralism can be practically continued, because we will be forced to deliver and to not only fulfill our 2% GDP goal of NATO to spend more on defense, but also to be actively engaged and to take responsibility. And this will be something that does not allow any future chancellor to just treat China as a nice trading partner who's also a bit of a competitor, but we are in a global competition in geopolitics about what is the future leading model. And in this leading model, we put the human being, the individual with human rights at the heart of everything. The United States stand more for a neoliberal project of let markets do what markets can do best. And China represents a system in which the Communist Party tells the people what to do. And these are three very different models. And in a shrinking world, the competition will become more fierce, no matter if you have a nice guy in the German Chancellery or not.
Okay.
Here I may disagree, if I may. If I just come in, I think Germany has a reputation of ignoring its national interests and basically doing what other people want it to do, be it the United States, France, or other countries. I don't think this is always correct. When you look at Nord Stream 2, the Germans, despite all pressure on the Merkel government by the European Union, by the United States, but many other countries, they still stuck to it. And in the end, Biden agreed that Nord Stream 2 would be acceptable and could be finished. So if it comes to the national interest, the Germans at least sometimes can insist on their own advantage. And I think we may see that with China, that engagement with China, particularly economically, is highly important to Germany. And I cannot see that the United States or other European Union countries can push Germany away from that. They know what is to their advantage to some extent. So I think, Germany in the post-Merkel era will probably try to continue its role of mediator and balancer between China and the United States, and that may well be a good thing.
Okay, this is fascinating. I really want to continue our conversation. There's one factor that we haven't talked about. Since a lot of you talk about ideas and principles, there's one idea when it comes to international relations these days that is very much in focus, also in focus at the ongoing UN General Assembly. Whether multilateralism is still the key word here. And that applies to every country to choose right now. We saw some countries use words, for example, partners and allies, but not necessarily multilateralism anymore. And yet, for many others, Germany included, in previous speeches given by the current chancellor, multilateralism is the principle that Germany still holds on to. So that is a very much, if you're talking about choices to be made, a clear choice that countries have to make, including Germany. Professor Bruckner, you go first, and then Professor Laris and Professor Mao, please.
Yeah, we have a strong verbal commitment to multilateralism that became even more intense in the Trump years. But it's one thing to preach it and to sort of practice it on a European level, because the EU is a perfect example of applied multilateralism. But what was praised by Professor Mao as a perfect example of leading by example with Nord Stream can also be read as unilateral action without consulting partners. Merkel did what she wanted, or the government did, to continue with what Schröder has started with. And the same happened in the migration crisis, in which Merkel suddenly discovered her humanitarian heart and supported people in need, which was strongly supported by the German public. But no one was consulted in the rest of the European Union, which had a very different attitude towards should migration policy be a competence of the European Union, and shall we distribute more than 1 million refugees in countries that have no experience with it?
If I interpret what you're trying to say, is that Germany has been practicing selective multilateralism from day one?
Germany is preaching multilateralism, but we find a number of unilateral acts that are strictly in deeds the opposite of what multilateralism implies theoretically.
But let me go to Professor Laris, please. Professor.
Yeah, the selective multilateralism is, of course, that what most countries in the world do. No one is totally multilateral or, fully sticks out to the...
But there is a difference, Professor Laris. We cannot just push things to either 0 or 100, right? There is a difference between whether you have that as an aspiration or you totally dismiss it as a principle, right?
Exactly. No, the Germans have a strong multilateral conviction. And I would say most countries in the world outside the superpower realm, the United States, China, perhaps Russia, they can afford to perhaps dismiss multilateralism more easily because they're strong enough to go it their own way. For a middle power like Germany, this is hardly ever possible. Also, when you look at the European Union, of course, French-German cooperation is highly important, but they actually can't do it by themselves. They need other countries like Poland or Italy to be on their side, to be able to push things through. So multilateralism will continue. It might be selective at times, because countries are also selfish, work in their national interest. But on the whole, the future German Chancellor will also be a multilateralist. Germany is simply a much smaller country. It is not as influential as the United States. It cannot do things big powers like the United States or China or Russia can afford to do.
Well, you are probably too much dismissing yourself, it seems, at least in our eyes. But Mr. Mao, go ahead, Mr. Mao.
Well, that's the German debating culture.
Indeed,
continues disagrees with each other. So multilateralism, I oddly agree with both of them that Germany is committed to multilateralism. But in my opinion, multilateralism is more about not shutting others out, just involving others in the position-making process. That does not mean that we cannot have bilateral partnership with other countries, with specific countries. That is exactly what Merkel has in her 16 years have done. Take China as example. Professor Bruckner has just talked about the power of institutions and how the institutions can be a factor of stability, even in the after Merkel era. I just want to mention a few, Merkel have helped establish the high-level dialogues mechanism between the two Chinese and German governments. That Merkel has left, that is her legacy to the multilateral commitment with, if you take China as example, with this partnership with China. And that explains what I have mentioned, her balance between the interest-based and value-based foreign policies.
I see.
She didn't pick sides. She just stand in the middle and try to be the mediator, which in that point I agree with Mr. Laris. Also, finally, we have some shared points.
Right. I mean, it's wonderful that you agree and you agree to disagree. Thank you so much, Ulrich Bruckner, Klaus Laris, and Mao Mingchao. Really appreciate it. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Coming up, booming trade between China and ASEAN neighbors. Is there more room to grow? What's the prospect despite global headwinds? Answers from a China-ASEAN trade expert. Next.
At the end of this year, all the 15 countries will be in the position to ratify this very important agreement.
The world is changing fast, taking all our lives with it. But we can change it too, by seeking answers to problems through discussions and debates. On World Insight, I ask direct questions to real people in the know, seek genuine answers, but respect diverse perspectives. Our live global debates tackle the most critical issues head-on. World Insight with Tian Wei. Go beyond the headlines.
Welcome back. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The 18th China-ASEAN Expo and the concurrent China-ASEAN Business and Investment Summit wrapped up Monday in the southern Chinese city Nanning. Some 179 deals, all worth a record high 300 billion yuan, were signed during the expo. China has been ASEAN's largest trading partner for 12 consecutive years, the volume swelling 85 times since starting dialogue relations 30 years ago. Earlier, I talked to Zhang Shaogang, Vice Chairman of the China Council for Promotion of International Trade. He talks intensively about the China-ASEAN ties. Take a listen. China-ASEAN trade skyrocketing. Look at volume. It's amazing. How come the trade could be so outstanding?
As you rightly mentioned, our bilateral trade increasing dramatically, 85 times to compare with 30 years. And at this point, I would like to say not only we are now the largest trading partner with each other, but also each other's very important investment partner. Let me elaborate one by one. In terms of bilateral trade, I just want to highlight one point, the market share. You can see last year, Chinese market accounted for 19.4% of total ASEAN trade, while at the same time, the ASEAN trade with China accounted for more than 40% of Chinese trade. So that can demonstrate clearly we are very important, not only for the trade.
I mean, if you look at that trade number, anyone would assume it is extremely compatible, but how? I think that needs to be highlighted.
The first and the most important one is the support and the guidance of our leaders of both sides. Maybe you can recall every year on a regular basis, our leaders may sit together and they discuss a very important issue about the future architecture and the direction of our cooperation. And I think that indeed give us a very important leadership and guidance.
So top support.
Yeah, top support. The other is institutional arrangement, particularly the China-ASEAN FTA, which I personally involve very deeply. The FTA between China and ASEAN has been in place for nearly 20 years.
Okay.
It's already 20 years. So with the existence of China-ASEAN FTA, both sides dramatically reduce our tariff and freer our liberalizing our services and the investment market. So that gives rise to current scenario.
And now RCEP.
Yeah.
We're still waiting for that to be implemented, but just think about that. What would that mean? It's probably another astronomical growth in terms of trade.
The RCEP is the combination of 5 existing ASEAN FTAs with its trading partner. So within this new scenario and architecture, there are many new elements have been inserted into this process. The other issue is not only a physical reaction, it's going to create a chemical reaction. The most important...
I love that word, reaction.
The most important effect, in my opinion, will be the full integration of our significant and the largest market involving in the 15 countries, the member states. So I think the chemical reaction will come from this emerging market. So all those elements put together, you will see a very integrated, largest market in this world. And I could say in this new market, all the rules will be unified. So maybe in other words, in the past, you have to follow country by country's rule. But now you need only to have one driver's license that will lead you to move freely among all the 15 countries.
That sounds absolutely enticing. But if you think about how much synergy, as you said, chemical reaction, this could create and the impact one could have toward the other, not just about the numbers, but also about how things are being done. That is going to be tremendous in a way, Mr. Zhang.
Indeed, the membership of RCEP is quite diversified. It involves some very advanced economy like Japan and Korea, and also it includes some LDC country like Laos, Cambodia, and so on, so forth. I think this is just the merit of the China-ASEAN FTA because it creates a new pattern that can demonstrate an FTA can bring the economy at different level together. So I believe maybe it can create a new path for all the countries in this world to move ahead hand in hand. On the other hand, I think in terms of the level or the strength of this FTA, I think to compare with those existing FTAs, RCEP involve or incorporate a number of new elements. For example, the electronic commerce. It is one of the most comprehensive article containing in this new agreement. Not only for the traditional part like privacy, electronic signature, so on and so forth, it's also involving some tendency with regard to the free data flow and the server allocation. So that can bring about some new thinking and new way to guide the cooperation among those 15 countries, and maybe it will create some new opportunity for member states to collaborate together.
But Mr. Zhang, I understand now, even though everybody suggests that we want to have RCEP, the 15 countries, the economies still need to go through their own internal political process. And now there are several countries that have already approved that, China, for example, and Singapore, for example. But there are others that didn't do it yet. Now things are getting a little bit more complicated in terms of geopolitics. So as someone who negotiated from day one, at that time things were not as it is today. Are you worried?
Not exactly. I have the great confidence that at the end of the day, for example, at the end of this year, all the 15 countries will be in the position to ratify this very important agreement.
At the end of this year? That is the breaking news to me.
Yes, I think that's my assessment. Why I said that? Because during the negotiation process, and even after the signature of this agreement, all the 15 countries are very keen and enthusiastic about the early entry into force of this agreement. The difference of ratification process is simply because the different countries have different procedures. But to my knowledge, all the 15 countries want the early ratification. Now they all accelerate their pace for the ratification. With that in mind, I think we have no doubt that most possibly the agreement will be ratified by all member states.
Now things are getting apparently ever more complicated in terms of politics and geopolitics. Some of the countries are having all of a sudden elections, likely, for example. And of course, everybody is having the impact of geopolitics. For the rest of the year, it's still going to be very challenging. So what business communities telling you from different parts of the world about how they see RCEP and how do they see the future of trade? What does that mean to them?
Actually, after signing of this agreement, the CCTN, the organization I serve, have maintained the closest contact with our counterpart in other RCEP member states. And actually, we already organized several symposiums and seminars to say how we can welcome and embrace the upcoming RCEP. To my communication with my counterpart in the other countries, I think they are very serious about the upcoming RCEP because number one, they believe the RCEP will bring tremendous trade and investment opportunity for themselves. So they want to take the advantage of it. This is a very starting point. The second point is that they like the new rules very much because to compare with previous FTA, because it signed many years ago, maybe it's not so closely to keep their pace with time. But the RCEP is the most updated agreement among 15 countries. It involves a lot of new set of rules which can guide our cooperation under the current circumstance. So they think this rule will take effect and it will safeguard our cooperation in a very smooth manner.
Just to report to you, Mr. Zhang, I've been talking to various scholars and also experts coming from the area of RCEP countries. And everything when they said about the future relations, the first thing they talk about is RCEP and the possible trade volume and investment volume we could have toward one another in the future. When you ask that, people have light in their eyes. That's something amazing at this moment when we see so many changes in the world. I'm sure you had the same feeling.
Yes, indeed. You know, both you and me attend the China-ASEAN Expo. By definition, China-ASEAN Expo is 10+1 Expo. But what I heard most is not about the China-ASEAN, but RCEP. So I really feel a little bit worried about that, and I'm thinking.
Why do you worry? You should be very proud because you participated from day one of that negotiation.
As a matter of, I'm even thinking whether we need to consider to expand the size of China-ASEAN Expo to rename it as a RCEP Expo.
That would be a great idea.
Certainly, that's my personal opinion. We need to consult our ASEAN colleagues to see whether it is feasible. Or maybe we can create a new platform to accommodate RCEP.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, there are many ways to address this issue. And I think, indeed, given the deeper liberalization and safeguarded by the new rules, RCEP will indeed create a tremendous trade and investment opportunity. I still want to highlight, when we talk about trade, our first reaction is about the trading goods. I want to talk about trading services. Nowadays, the trade in service account for 17% of our total trade. Maybe when you heard about this figure, you see it is still okay. But if I let you know the world average is 30%, trading services is about 30% of total trade. And for the advanced economy, it is about over 40%. So we can see the gap between RCEP with the average level of world economy. So I believe trading service, for trading services, we will have a lot of things to tap.
What about investment?
I will give you one shining figure. Last year, China invested 14.4 billion US dollar to ASEAN countries, 10 ASEAN countries, which is 3.3 times higher than the figure in 10 years ago. people all like the investment because investment not only bring about trade but also create new jobs, and it can also change the quality of people's life.
But you heard about arguments from different parts of the world. China have not done enough. China has not fulfilled its obligations. China has been promising too much and yet action limited. How would you respond to those accusations?
I think in terms of our commitment, in 2010, China already tabled our report to the WTO by announcing we have completed all our WTO commitment. That report is well celebrated and welcomed by all the WTO members at that time. So if you challenge that China had not fully honor our commitment, you need to give our evidence where and how. But you should not just orally challenge China, but without any grounding. So it's not a responsible assessment.
Mr. Zhang, we see China has been making efforts on different fronts. For example, its commitment to reduction of carbon. How do you see that? What does that mean to the business community?
According to my understanding and my knowledge, I think our business people, our enterprises are very serious about this commitment. At current time, they try to understand our commitment and see how they can react to this commitment. Number two, they are just working on their roadmap to consider how to reduce the existing current carbon and how to reach the peak, and from peak, how to realize the objective of the neutralization.
Looking forward to more specific answers from you and the business community from China. Thank you so much, Mr. Zhang. As always, it's a pleasure.
Thank you.
And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching and bye for now.